Good morning, friends. Good morning, and welcome to another week, another episode of PB Reads the Bible. Today is Monday, July 11th, and this is, I don't know what episode number this is total, but this is episode 24 on our journey through the book of 1 Samuel. And today we're actually going to be looking at two chapters. We're going to do two chapters today, but we'll talk about that in a minute here. First of all, who am I? Right? I'm PB. I'm Pastor Brian, the pastor here at Christ United Methodist Church in Waynesboro, Pennsylvania. And thank you for joining with us in this study. Now, some of you folks are join live on a regular basis. Others, you can't. And so you find time out of your busy lives whenever you can in order to join us. And both of those things are amazing and fill me with truly humble me that you find this worthwhile. And out of the corner of my eye, I can see people are already doing it, but go ahead and check in. Let me know who you are and why you're there. Good morning, Cheryl. Good to see you this morning, and good to actually be able to see your comments this morning. Last week, for some reason, I wasn't able to, but today they are. So good morning to you. And I saw a message from Marcia there, and it disappeared. I don't know, but hopefully Marcia is still with us. But I do see a number, and that's all I see. So I like to see the names. Go ahead and check in. Romper Room Roll Call. Somebody called this one time. I just like to know who it is. And even if you're not watching live, you can still let us know that you watched, that you joined with us in this small group, because this is a small group, regardless of number. We're a small group, and so we share life together. We live life together. Oh, Marcia, good morning, and thank you for sharing the word and making the Bible characters come alive. Well, I am humbled. Thank you. Thank you for that. Oh, John and Cindy checking in. All right, and you're able to join us live this morning. Great. Love that. Love that. Continued prayers, John. Glad to hear you're doing well. Yeah, and as far as prayers, anything that's on your hearts and your minds that you want us to surround each other in prayer with, because that's what we do as a small group, is surround each other with prayer. Let us know what those things are. You can put them in the comment section, or you can send me a text. If for some reason you don't want to put it on there, or if you're using some sort of a system and you can't leave comments, go ahead and send me the text. I know sometimes people are watching it on like on the smart TV, and maybe they can't leave comments or check in that way. You use my cell phone, 570-351-1619, to take care of that. So what was I going to say? Oh, yes, I was going to give you a couple announcements. I already started that. I said this is episode 24 on our journey through 1 Samuel, and we're going to be looking at chapters 26 and 27 today. We're going to do two chapters today. Good morning, Dawn. Excuse me. Good morning, Don. Good to have you with us this morning and live. Yes, prayers for Jolene and family. As we mentioned yesterday, Jolene is home following a brief stay in the hospital with pneumonia, but she is under hospice care. So continued prayers for Jolene and for her family at this time. I would also ask for prayers for the family of Dick Bonebreak. Dick was a resident in my neighborhood, just lived down 10 units on our street on Quail Run Drive, and he passed during the night, Saturday into Sunday. So prayers for his family at this time. Yeah, so announcements. Yes, I said we're going to do 26 and 27 today. Which will leave us with 4 more chapters. So what that means is I plan on finishing 1 Samuel this week. We might do 2 chapters tomorrow and 2 on Wednesday and be finished on Wednesday, or we might do just 1 chapter on one of those days and continue into Thursday. But regardless, we're going to finish 1 Samuel this week, and we will either start 2 Samuel this week or next week, depending on how things play out. We're going to just go right from 1 Samuel into 2 Samuel. So just to remind you, or to bore you with details that you already know, 1 and 2 Samuel originally were one thing. They were one book of the Bible. In fact, if you look at a Hebrew Bible, which I glanced to my right because I have one up on my shelf, it is still just Samuel. It's not 1 and 2 Samuel. It's just Samuel. For whatever reason, at some point they decided to split it in half into two. Best we can say is that maybe it was such a large document, such a large scroll, they thought it would be simpler and easier to have it as two books of the Bible rather than one. And they picked a particular place to make that break. And we're going to find out what that is. You probably already know, maybe I even already mentioned it, but just in case I didn't, I'm not going to do any spoilers. We'll just have to hold out a few more chapters to find out why they broke it where they did. Excuse me, I did get a text, but not anything important. Store trying to get me to buy something. So let's get into it then, shall we? And I'm pretty sure this week we'll be live at 9 a.m. all 4 days this week. Monday, obviously today, tomorrow, Wednesday, and Thursday as well. I don't have any early morning meetings where I would need to record it. Although if I do, it doesn't really matter to you because it would still be live at 9. So let's jump in. Because where were we? We had finished chapter 25. 24 and 25, although we read separately, they show two things. They show, as I mentioned, they show that idea of violence and force, and using violence or force to get your way, to get power, or to maintain power. David had the opportunity in chapter 24, came close, looked over the brink, saw how close he became. He got there, just by clipping off a corner of the road. But he restrained his hand from killing Saul, even though Saul wants to use violence to maintain power. Then we saw in chapter 25, David again being tempted with the idea of violence and shedding of innocent blood. And he was willing to until Abigail spoke to him, and he kind of regained sense and pulled back. And he says this is from God. He attributes it to God that his hand has been restrained from the shedding of innocent blood. We're going to see in chapter 26 a third instance of David being tempted to use violence, and what his reaction is, how he handles the situation. So here we go. 26. And this is going to sound, this passage is going to sound very familiar. Some say it's really just a second recounting of the earlier story with added things. There are a lot of similarities, so that's extremely possible, but the author or editors must have felt the need to put it in here. So then the Ziphite, I'm sorry, let me read that text. This one. Oh, all right. Prayers for Bob Fry. That's what we'll do here. Thank you, Pat, for that. We will continue to keep Bob in prayers. Bob was doing well following his eye surgery, but apparently has had a couple setbacks. So prayers for that. All right, let's get to the reading. Then the Ziphites came to Saul at Gibeah, saying, David is in hiding on the hill of Hachilah, which is opposite Jeshimon. So Saul rose and went down to the wilderness of Ziph. with 3,000 chosen men of Israel to seek David in the wilderness of Ziph. Saul encamped on the hill of Hachilah, which is opposite Jeshimon, beside the road. But David remained in the wilderness. When he learned that Saul had come after him into the wilderness, David sent out spies and learned that Saul had indeed arrived. Then David set out and came to the place where Saul had encamped. And David saw the place where Saul lay, with Abner, son of Ner, the commander of his army. Saul was lying within the encampment, while the army was encamped around him. Pause. So you've probably already said this is the same story, right? As I said, there are so many similarities between this. Same places, same people. It's those darn Ziphites, apparently. But we see a big difference because in the earlier story, David stayed in hiding, and it was almost only by chance that he had the encounter with Saul. Saul was more active. Saul went after David, and David had to keep moving, right? But not so in this case. In this case, we're being shown a different character of David. We're showing him to be more active now. All of a sudden, he sends out spies to find out exactly where Saul is, and he goes to where Saul is, and he finds the place, and he sees Saul lying. It must be nighttime, obviously, asleep next to Abner, son of Ner, who is his personal bodyguard, the commander-in-chief of the army, and supposed to be very protective of the king, lying next to him in the middle of the encampment. So he's got his 3,000 handpicked soldiers lying all around them. It's a pretty good place to be, right? Everything would seem to be going Saul's way. Abner probably thinks this is a good setup. This is a good setup. David has his 600 men. So there's still 5 times as many people. Saul has 5 times as many warriors. So picking up from there, verse 6. Then David said to Ahimelech the Hittite and to Joab's brother Abishai, son of Zeruiah, who will go down with me into the camp to Saul. Abishai said, I will go down with you. So David and Abishai went to the army by night. There Saul lay sleeping within the encampment, with his spear stuck in the ground at his head. And Abner and the army lay around him. Abishai said to David, God has given your enemy into your hand today. Now, therefore, let me pin him to the ground with one stroke of the spear. I will not strike him twice. But David said to Abishai, do not destroy him, for who can raise his hand against Yahweh's anointed and be guiltless? David said, as Yahweh lives, Yahweh will strike him down, or his day will come to die, or he will go down into battle and perish. Yahweh forbid that I should raise my hand against Yahweh's anointed. But now take the spear that is at his head and the water jar, and let us go. So David took the spear that was at Saul's head and the water jar, and they went away. No one saw it or knew it, nor did anyone awake, for they were all asleep, because a deep sleep from Yahweh had fallen upon them. Pause. That's a pretty big section, right? So David makes his plan. He wants to go into camp where Saul is sleeping, to see what's going on, and we end up finding to make a demonstration of what he could have done. And he asks for a volunteer to go with him. He's not going to go by himself. He's just going to take, but he only wants to take one person with him. He specifically asks these couple guys. We're not told, but it sounds like Ahimelech must have said, no, I ain't going. But Abishai very quickly says, oh, sure, I'll go. This is in keeping with Abishai's. This is almost like a precursor, a foreshadowing of what kind of person Abishai is, and which we find out more in chapter 2. Abishai, if we read it correctly, pretty sure this is how it is actually a nephew of David. He was the son of that Zeruiah isn't a male, that's a female. That's David's sister. So Abishai is his nephew, it would seem. At least that's one way to read it. But we find out he's pretty headstrong, right? Pretty quick to things. And when he gets to camp, he's very quick to want to kill. This speaks a lot about some issues that are going to arise because of Abishai and his closest friends, relatives, soldiers, and some things that happen with David. David even ends up saying about Abishai and the others, they're too quick, they're too violent for me, something like that, which we'll read all about that in 2 Samuel. So he quickly says, "Sure, I'll go." They get down there, and he wants to kill Saul. Now, he says, "Oh, look, God has delivered your enemy. God has given your enemy into your hand. Let me strike him down," right? So earlier, the other time that we're told about this, the soldiers say, "Oh, go ahead. It's your chance to kill him." But here, Abishai doesn't say that. Abishai says he's delivered. God has delivered him into your hands. Let me be the extension of your hand. Let me be your instrument. Let me kill him. And he wants to do it with Saul's own spear and pin him to the ground. But David again objects to that. He pulls back from this idea of violence and force and murder in order to gain things. He knows, or he believes, he's confident that God is with him and that God is going to give him the kingdom of Israel, and so he doesn't need to do this. He's also sure that anyone who tries to strike Yahweh's anointed, God's anointed, will not be found guiltless. Will not be found guiltless. We see some foreshadowing here too. We see this prediction of Saul's death, somewhat hinted at in chapter 25 with the case of Nabal. And may all your enemies be like Nabal. But here, David is pretty clear, pretty specific. And he says one of three things is going to happen. Yahweh will strike him down, or his day will come to die, meaning he'll just die from natural causes, or he will go down into battle and perish. Now, in narrative, in storytelling, and in jokes and comedy, there's the rule of three, right? There's the rule of three. So David gives these three different possibilities for how Saul is going to die. The rule of three would say the third one is what's going to happen. Think of Jesus telling parables, and it's the third one that's the surprise. We're telling, like I said, telling jokes. It's always three people. A priest, a monk, and a rabbi, or whatever, walk into a bar. There's always the three. So here David gives three, and it's usually the third that's the truth. Spoiler alert on that. The third is the truth. So there's foreshadowing. There's this foretelling of Saul's death and of how it's going to happen. Not just that Saul's going to die, but the author is letting us know in advance how it's going to happen. And he goes on to say, far be it from me to raise my hand against Yahweh's anointed. But let us take the spear and the water jar. Now, why are they doing that? Well, spoiler alert, but to prove that they were there. Quite simply, to prove that they were there. Then David went over, so we'll pick up from there, 13. Then David went over to the other side and stood on top of a hill far away with a great distance between them. David called to the army and to Abner, son of Ner, saying, Abner, will you not answer? And then Abner replied, who are you that calls to the king? Pause. Abner doesn't recognize David's voice, which is odd. But also, I find it interesting that he says that calls to the king. David didn't call to the king. He called specifically to Abner. Does Abner think of himself as king? I don't know. That's just me picking up on something there, I guess. Maybe I shouldn't. Maybe there's nothing there. David said to Abner, "Are you not a man?" Which might be an answer to that thing about who calls the king. "Who is like you in Israel? Why then have you not kept watch over your Lord, the king? For one of the people came in to destroy your Lord, the king. This thing that you have done is not good. As Yahweh lives, you deserve to die, because you have not kept watch over your Lord, Yahweh's anointed. See now, where is the king's spear, or the water jar that was at his head?" Pause. So he's ridiculing Abner. Abner is supposed to be this great, mighty warrior and this personal guard to the king, and was lying right next to the king. And you let somebody crawl right into camp and take these things away. They could have easily killed your Lord, the king, Yahweh's anointed. Continuing. Oh, and here's a difference between what we saw earlier. Remember in chapter 24, David comes out from the cave, yells down to Saul, has a lengthy speech. Saul replies to it, and that's like the end of it. This is a little bit different because here we're going to see something similar, but this is more of a conversation, a dialogue. We see it going back and forth. So David has said his stuff to Abner. Picking up from there, verse 17. Saul recognized David's voice and said, "Is this your voice, my son David?" David said, "It is my voice, my lord, O king." Pause. Ooh. So we're reminded of a couple things. Remember how Saul used to not use David's name. For a while there, he wasn't using David's name, this son of Jesse, and being insulting and derogatory, until 24, when he was like shattered out of into lucidity and started calling him David and referred to him as son. And David called him father, right? And David did that first. Here, we're hearing Saul refer to David as son, but David is keeping some distance in his language. He doesn't say father. He says, "My lord, O king." Continuing, and he added, "Why does my lord pursue his servant? For what have I done? What guilt is on my hands? Now, therefore, let my lord the king hear the words of his servant. If it is Yahweh who has stirred you up against me, may he accept an offering. But if it is mortals, may they be cursed before Yahweh, for they have driven me out today from my share in the heritage of Yahweh, saying, 'Go serve other gods.' Now, therefore, do not let my blood fall to the ground, away from the presence of Yahweh, for the king of Israel has come out to seek a single flea, like one who hunts a partridge in the mountains." Pause. So David, in addition to basically declaring his innocence, he wants to know, who has stirred you up against me? Who has planted these things in your mind? Is it Yahweh or is it mortals? If it's Yahweh, maybe he'll be appeased by an offering. But if it's mortals, then may they be cursed by Yahweh forever. There's a difference in that, right? If God's done this, I'll place an offering and God will probably forgive me. But if it's mere mortals, then what they're doing is so wrong and so evil. May God curse them. For they have driven me out today from my share in the heritage of Yahweh, saying, 'Go serve other gods.'" What does that mean? This is the author or editor's way of describing what's going to happen next. Because next, spoiler alert, you only have to wait a few verses to find out, David leaves Israel. David leaves Israel and goes into Philistine territory. And so he's saying it's their fault. They're forcing me to do this. Continuing. Then Saul said, "I have done wrong. Come back, my son David, for I will never harm you again, because my life was precious in your sight today. I have been a fool and have made a great mistake. Pause. Now, if this is a different telling of the same story, well, then it only happened once. But if this is a telling of a different story, then David should be aware that Saul's word really doesn't mean much. He already promised him that he was going to stop hunting him, and here he comes after him a second time. He said, I've been a fool. Ooh, where has that word come up recently? Well, just in chapter 25, speaking about Nabal. Abigail said, he is like his name. He's a fool. So here we're seeing Saul saying, I am Nabal. I have been Nabal. And what happened to Nabal? Nabal died. Continuing, David replied, here is the spear, O king. Perhaps even the same spear that Saul had thrown at David earlier. Right? Continuing, let one of the young men come over and get it. Yahweh rewards everyone for his righteousness and his faithfulness. For Yahweh gave you into my hand today, but I would not raise my hand against Yahweh's anointed. As your life was precious today in my sight, so may my life be precious in the sight of Yahweh, and may he rescue me from all tribulation. Then Saul said to David, blessed be you, my son David. You will do many things and will succeed in them. So David went his way, and Saul returned to his place. End of chapter 26. So David is pronouncing, hey, God, what was it? Rewards everyone for his righteousness and faithfulness. He's basically calling himself righteous and faithful, and saying that God is going to reward me. Saul has asked David to come back into the family, come back into the royal household, whatever. But there's nothing more that Saul has to give him. David is confident that the kingdom is going to be his, but Saul can't give it to him. God will, and God will bless the righteous and the faithful, and so God will rescue me from all tribulation. And then Saul makes this final pronouncement: "You will do many things and will succeed in them." In the Hebrew, it's there's double infinitives, like perfect infinitives in there. It translates, you will indeed do many things and will surely succeed in them. Love those sounds of the kids. And this is going to be the last time that David and Saul are together. All right. So picking up from there with chapter 27 and verses 1 and 2 of chapter 28. Just because I want to finish this section of the story. At verse 3, the author changes direction. All right. David said in his heart, I shall now perish one day by the hand of Saul. There is nothing better for me than to escape to the land of the Philistines. Then Saul will despair of seeking me any longer within the borders of Israel, and I shall escape out of his hand. Pause. That's what the author was talking about when he said it's their fault that I'm being forced to flee before the Lord and go and serve other gods. He meant leave Israel. He was speaking about leaving Israel. Continuing, so David set out and went over, he and the 600 men who were with him, to King Achish, son of Maach of Gath. David stayed with Achish at Gath, he and his troops, every man with his household, and David with his 2 wives, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail of Carmel, Nabal's widow. When Saul was told that David had fled to Gath, he no longer sought for him. Pause. So David was right by leaving Israel, by leaving Judah in particular, southern Israel, and going into Philistine territory, going into this the city-state of Gath. Saul has given up on chasing after him. He's not going to go that far. But this passage gives a lot of details, talking about a lot of numbers, right? He and his 600 men who were with him, along with their households, and David with his 2 wives. So we're not just talking a band of soldiers at this point. We're talking a small city. David and his 600 men, presumably with their households, meaning their wives, their children, their servants, if they had servants, David's wives, and any children that he might have, although we're not told about any yet, right? And this whole giant entourage. So we're talking not 600 people. We might be talking 1,500 people, as well as livestock that they've probably brought with them. This is pretty big. This is pretty big. And so then David said to Achish, if I have found favor in your sight, let a place be given me in one of the country towns, so that I may live there. For why should your servant live in the royal city with you? So that day Achish gave him Ziklag. Therefore Ziklag has belonged to the kings of Judah to this day. The length of time that David lived in the country of the Philistines was 1 year and 4 months. Pause. So what's going on? Why does David go to the king and ask for this place? Well, we're seeing David throughout this chapter. We're going to see David pretty conniving. We're going to see different characters to David. We're going to see what he's capable of. We're going to see some of the things that way back when, in chapter 14 or whatever it was, when Saul's servant first told Saul about David, in that one case of which David was introduced, he told him all the things he could do. Oh, he's a poet, he's a musician, he's a warrior, etc., etc. He goes through like 5, 6 different things. We've seen some of those characteristics of David, and we've been told of some of those characteristics of David, but now we're going to see them more fully. We're going to see that he is capable of being pretty conniving, very clever, very clever. We're also going to see him as a warrior, a fighter, and we're going to see him very brutal, very brutal. We're going to see all of this in these next few verses. Sorry, spoiler alert on that, but that's also a trigger warning, you might say. Hope this doesn't offend you too bad. And he is already plotting. He doesn't want to live right next to the king. If he and his men are stay in Gath itself, close to the king, he says, oh, why should that be? I'm nothing compared to you, is basically what he's saying. Just put us out in the country somewhere. What he wants is to be away from the king, to be away from the king's eyes. If I'm in Gath with all my men, I'm going to be limited in what I can do. And this, I'm going to have to serve this king very well. Whereas if I'm away from him, I might be able to get away with some stuff. That's the plotting. Continuing. Now David and his men went up and made raids on the Geshurites, the Girzites, and the Amalekites. For these were the landed settlements from Telam on the way to Shur and on to the land of Egypt. David struck the land, leaving neither man nor woman alive, but took away the sheep, the oxen, the donkeys, the camels, and the clothing, and came back to Achish. Pause. So he went and he's performing raids on these communities. These communities are actually Philistine communities. He's killing everyone so that no one can get out to tell the truth. And he's taking the booty. He's taking all the livestock and clothing and everything. And he's taking it back to King Achish. What's he doing? And this sounds wrong, doesn't it? Saul got in trouble for not or for taking stuff. That was a holy war. This isn't a holy war. This is just war. David was worried about being guilty of shedding innocent blood. There's no blood guilt in war, and this is basically war. That's what he's doing here. He's fighting for Judah in Philistine territory. So those restrictions don't come into place. He's being brutal about it. He's being brutal about it. Notice, though, he's not keeping the stuff, or at least not keeping all of it. It might be keeping some of it just to keep themselves alive, as far as the cattle and stuff like that. But he's giving the majority of the stuff to King Achish. Why is he doing that? Well, so the king thinks that he's doing great work for him. Right? Continuing. When Achish asked, "Against whom have you made a raid today?" David would say, "Against the Negeb of Judah, or against the Negeb of the Jerahmeelites, or against the Negeb of the Kenites." David left neither man nor woman alive to be brought back to Gath, thinking they might tell about us and say, "David has done so and so." Such was his practice all the time he lived in the country of the Philistines. Achish trusted David, thinking, "He has made himself utterly abhorrent to his people Israel. Therefore, he shall always be my servant." Okay. So David lies to the king. King says, "Where have you been raiding?" And notice they're not the same places as we're told he raided. He's using towns and places in Judah. But since he's killed everyone, no one can get back to tell King the truth. That's the point. Now the King Achish, thinks that since David has been raiding in Judah, the people of Judah are going to hate him and his men. And the word is going to spread throughout all of Israel that David can't be trusted, that he's been raiding and killing and thieving from Judah, from his own people, because he is from Judah himself, that he is going to have to stay loyal to me now, because there's no chance of him going back there. So David's plan seems to be working, because that's what David's plan was. Make him think I'm on his side. We're going to find out that his plan worked too well. David kind of painted himself into a corner. So here's what's going to happen in these first two verses of chapter 28, and then we're going to call it a day. In those days, the Philistines gathered their forces for war to fight against Israel. Achish said to David, "You know, of course, that you and your men are to go out with me in the army." David said to Achish, "Very well, then, you shall know what your servant can do." David's got to play this cards out, right? He has to play these cards. He dealt them himself. But he still has hopes. Well, if we have to fight with them or for them, he's hoping that they're going to be put on the outer edge, maybe rear guard kind of thing. And you'll find out what we can do. Achish said to David, "Very well, I will make you my bodyguard for life." Boom. Bodyguards of the king do not fight in the rear. They do not fight on the outer edges. They are going to be right next to the king. They're going to be on the front line. He has done such a good job of making Achish think that he's on his side, that Achish is going to really put him to the test and put him right up front with him. What's going to happen now in this war against Israel? Well, we're going to have to wait and see. We ended there because the author actually changes direction in their story. Changes scene, and that would be a great spot for us to stop today, and we'll pick it up from there tomorrow. At least one chapter tomorrow, maybe two. We might read two again. Anyway, my friends, I pray that this has been beneficial to you, that you've learned something or relearned something through what we've read, what we've said. As you go about your days, not just today, but every day. Keep those eyes and ears, both physical and spiritual, open to everything that God is doing in your life and in the lives of those around you. When you see it, when you hear it, say, "Thank you, Papa," and then do something, tell somebody about it. And be blessed, my friends. Until we meet again. Bye.